The relationship between the Jewish community and the U.S. government before the presidency of Harry Truman is complex, shaped by a variety of historical, political, and social factors. While the formal diplomatic and political relationship between the Jewish people, particularly regarding Zionist aspirations and the U.S. government, came to the forefront under Truman, earlier U.S. administrations and Jewish-American interactions provide important historical context. Jewish immigration to the United States. The first major contact between Jews and the American government began with Jewish immigration to the United States in the 17th and 18th centuries. The earliest Jewish settlers arrived in North America in 1654, fleeing persecution in Brazil. Although small in number, these early Jewish settlers established communities in cities such as New York, Philadelphia, and Charleston. For much of the 18th and 19th centuries, the relationship between Jews and the American government was shaped by the broader experience of Jewish immigrants and their efforts to integrate into American society. The U.S. government, from its founding, championed freedom of religion, which provided a relatively welcoming environment for Jewish communities. The U.S. Constitution, ratified in 1787, guaranteed religious freedom and prohibited religious tests for public office, thus offering Jews a degree of equality that was often absent in Europe. 19th century developments. In the 19th century, the Jewish population in America began to grow significantly, especially after waves of Jewish immigration from Europe in the wake of pogroms, political unrest, and economic hardship. By the mid-1800s, Jews were a small but visible minority in major U.S. cities. During this time, the U.S. government's policies were largely neutral or even indifferent to Jewish concerns. America's decentralized political system allowed Jews to integrate at the local level, where they were often able to pursue political and economic advancement without facing major obstacles from the federal government. Jewish Americans generally aligned themselves with the broader American ideals of democracy, civil liberties, and religious freedom, and many were active participants in the abolitionist movement and other social reform causes. However, anti-Semitism was not absent from the American political landscape. In the Civil War era, for example, General Ulysses Grant issued General Order No. 11 in 1862, expelling Jews from certain parts of the Tennessee Department due to suspicions of illegal trade. Although the order was quickly rescinded by President Abraham Lincoln after protests from Jewish leaders, it was a stark reminder of how anti-Semitic policies could arise even in a country that espoused religious freedom. Jewish Americans during this period sought greater political influence and representation. Jewish advocacy groups and individuals, often working through informal channels, sought to protect their rights and interests. Despite occasional flare-ups of anti-Semitism, the general policy of the U.S. government was one of tolerance and neutrality. Jewish political engagement and American foreign policy in the late 19th and early 20th centuries. By the late 19th century, a more organized Jewish political movement began to take shape. This was partly driven by rising anti-Semitism in Europe, particularly in Russia, and the increasing visibility of Zionism as a political movement. Theodor Herzl's establishment of the modern Zionist movement in 1897, with the goal of creating a Jewish homeland in Palestine, had a profound impact on Jewish communities worldwide, including in the United States. American Jews were divided on the issue of Zionism. Many Jews, particularly those who had been in the United States for several generations and had fully integrated into American society, were opposed to the idea of a separate Jewish homeland. They viewed America as their homeland and believed that Zionism would compromise their status as loyal American citizens. Other Jews, especially more recent immigrants from Eastern Europe who had experienced intense persecution, were more supportive of the Zionist cause. The U.S. government, for its part, had little interest in Zionism during the late 19th and early 20th centuries. America's foreign policy was focused on isolationism, and the issue of a Jewish homeland in Palestine was seen as a European concern. However, Jewish organizations in the United States did exert some influence on American foreign policy, particularly through lobbying efforts aimed at improving the conditions of Jews in Europe. Jewish leaders and organizations, such as the American Jewish Committee, founded in 1906, lobbied the U.S. government to take action on behalf of Jewish communities suffering under pogroms and anti-Semitic policies in Europe. The First World War and the Balfour Declaration. World War I and its aftermath marked a significant turning point in the relationship between Jews and the U.S. government. The war had a profound impact on Jewish communities in Europe and the Middle East, and the issue of a Jewish homeland in Palestine gained new urgency. In 1917, the British government issued the Balfour Declaration, which expressed support for the establishment of a national home for the Jewish people in Palestine. While the U.S. government did not take an official position on the Balfour Declaration, many American Jews saw it as a major step forward for the Zionist cause. American Jewish leaders, particularly those involved in the Zionist movement, sought to gain U.S. government support for the creation of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. Prominent Jewish figures such as Louis Brandeis, who was appointed to the U.S. Supreme Court by President Woodrow Wilson in 1916, played a key role in advocating for Zionist goals within the U.S. government. Brandeis, a leading Zionist, used his influence to rally support for the movement among American Jews and within the U.S. political establishment. Although President Wilson was sympathetic to the idea of a Jewish homeland, his administration remained focused on the broader issues of post-war reconstruction and the establishment of the League of Nations. The U.S. did not take an active role in supporting the Zionist cause during this period, though it did not oppose it either. The interwar period and the rise of anti-Semitism. The 1920s and 1930s were a time of both hope and fear for Jewish Americans. On the one hand, Jewish political organizations in the U.S. continued to advocate for the rights of Jews in Europe and for the establishment of a Jewish homeland in Palestine. On the other hand, the rise of fascism and anti-Semitism in Europe, particularly with the rise of Adolf Hitler in Germany, created a growing sense of fear and urgency among American Jews. During the 1930s, the U.S. government's response to Jewish concerns was often disappointing. President Franklin Roosevelt, while sympathetic to the plight of European Jews, was constrained by the isolationist sentiments of the American public and the political realities of the time. Immigration quotas, established in the 1920s, severely limited the number of Jewish refugees who could enter the United States, and the U.S. government was reluctant to take more decisive action to help Jews fleeing Nazi persecution. Despite these challenges, Jewish organizations in the U.S. continued to lobby the government for more active intervention on behalf of European Jews.